Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. I'm bringing you my deep dive episode today on the Star Trek Prodigy two-part season finale, Supernova. I realize it's a little bit late. It's maybe a bit of an understatement, but it is a video that I did promise that I wanted to do. And I want to get into the habit of bringing back my deep dive episodes. So without further ado, let's get into the Easter eggs and continuity connections in Supernova Parts 1 and 2 from Star Trek Prodigy. The beginning of this episode sees the return of Admiral Jellicoe back from his appearance a few episodes ago. Ronnie Cox is voicing him. He played then Captain Jellicoe in the TNG two-parter Chain of Command in that show's 6th season. It's always great to see classic characters return, and I'm a big fan of Ronnie Cox and his portrayal as Jellicoe, both here and in TNG. All right, let's talk a little bit about the fleet that is there to greet the USS Protostar. We have a number of familiar-looking ships, but not only that, actual familiar ships that we have seen in Star Trek previously. First of all, we see the Centaur-class ship features heavily in this fleet, and in fact, the USS Centaur herself, NCC 42043, is present. This is the ship that first appeared in the Deep Space Nine episode A Time to Stand.
That's Charlie Reynolds' ship.
We also see several Sovereign-class vessels. The registry and name that we see is the USS Sovereign, NCC 73811. Now, interestingly enough, we do also see the registry NCC 1701E on the nacelles of a Sovereign-class vessel, showing that the Enterprise herself is a part of this fleet. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of a snafu in here in that the registry of 1701E is seen on the nacelles of the same ship that we see the USS Sovereign name on. Also, we see a new arrival to the fleet much later in the episode is also the USS Sovereign, NCC 73811. So a little bit of a kind of mix-up here. I think for each class of ship, they only had one model to work with or one registry to work with. So the Sovereign class they used had the USS Sovereign markings on the primary hull and the 1701E markings on the nacelles. Also interestingly present here is the USS Thunderchild, not just the Akira class, but the actual Thunderchild, first seen in the film Star Trek First Contact. Now, this ship also makes an appearance in Season 2 of Star Trek Picard, so although she appears to be heavily damaged in this episode, she does clearly survive and is repaired in time to show up in Picard Season 2, which is set in a later year than this current season of Star Trek Prodigy. And finally, my favorite appearance in this battle is the USS Defiant, NX 74205, the USS Defiant that was, at least at one point, assigned to Starbase Deep Space Nine. Now, this is not the first Defiant that was at Deep Space Nine. That ship was, of course, destroyed in the Deep Space Nine Season 7 episode, The Changing Face of Evil. That ship was replaced by the USS Sao Paulo, which was renamed to Defiant, and interestingly enough, thanks to reused visual effects, also had the same registry number as the previous Defiant, NX 74205. Regardless of whether or not she is still stationed at Deep Space Nine in some capacity, she does make an appearance here. Unclear who is in command or what sort of crew is aboard her, but it's really cool to see the Defiant in action once again. This may or may not be intentional, but I rather enjoyed this shot of the Protostar flying past the window of the Dauntless. This very much reminded me of a similar scene from the film The Empire Strikes Back with the Millennium Falcon flying past the window. And just as in that film, the people reacting to the ship flyby inexplicably duck. I guess I might do the same if I were in their position, but it is a pretty meaningless gesture when a ship is on the other side of a bulkhead. This is by far one of my favorite references we've ever gotten in modern Star Trek Prodigy, and all of their shows included. The Starfleet officer guarding the brig where Janeway is being held turns out to be a Brinari refugee. These were telepathic refugees rescued by Voyager in the episode Counterpoint, one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager, and interestingly enough, apparently one of Kate Mulgrew's favorite episodes as well. Because of Janeway's deception towards the Devore and protecting the Brunari refugees, this officer places her trust in Janeway and releases her from the brig. Just a really beautiful scene full of a lot of emotion. I love when things aren't just kind of casually tossed off and shown to connect to past episodes, but instead have a meaningful and real connection to the plot and an actual impact on the events. So kudos to the writers for making this link to that wonderful episode of Voyager. In the transporter room, when Essentia, or the Vindicator, is making her escape to the protostar, we see her dreadnought deliver a Kirk Fu chop to the transporter operator. Definitely something we saw Captain Kirk and other Starfleet officers do occasionally. This is definitely in the Starfleet field guide for how to dispatch enemies quickly. Later in the episode, we get ships from other powers joining the fleet to take some of the heat off of the Starfleet ships, and amongst those are some familiar vessels. First of all, of course, the Klingon bird of prey, ubiquitous in the Star Trek universe since its first appearance in the film Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. We also have a Sirach-class Vulcan vessel, a Gorn trading vessel. This one is based on the Star Trek Remastered Gorn ship that we got in the TOS Remastered episode Arena. A Patarian bulk freighter, which of course looks similar to freighters of many different species that we've seen over the years. A Ferengi Decorah-class Marauder, and this vessel, which was first seen in Enterprise as either a Xindi arboreal ship or a Tellarite ship, or also, I believe, an Arconian ship at one point. Definitely a reused ship design that appeared several times in Enterprise. With the appearance of the Klingon vessels, we get a nice little touch of the Klingon theme, Jerry Goldsmith's original Klingon theme that first appeared in Star Trek: The Motion Picture and has been reused several times since, most notably in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier and Star Trek: First Contact. Definitely a recognizable theme whenever the Klingons make an appearance. And finally, in part 1, we have Gwyn making the comment that they can't stop the signal. I don't know that this was an intentional reference, but it definitely put me in the mind of the film Serenity, based on the Firefly TV show. That was one of the things that was repeated quite a bit in that film. You can't stop the signal. That was getting the word out about the crimes committed by the government of that region. So I really liked that reminder of that film and kind of made me want to go back and watch Firefly and Serenity again. All right, moving on now to part 2. So as I mentioned in part 1, we see the USS Thunderchild in this fleet. Now in this shot here, we get the Thunderchild warp nacelle flyby. We know because it has the registry NCC 63549. This is the Thunderchild. However, as I said, the Thunderchild is not destroyed in this battle. It is at least recovered and repaired, and it survives until at least 2401, which is Picard's second season. The year this episode takes place is 2384, so she has quite a few years of service still ahead of her when we see this nacelle flyby here. Jacob Pog is referred to as a miracle worker in this episode. This, of course, is a reference to the nickname often given to Scotty from Star Trek: The Original Series, who was known as a miracle worker. We hear the distress call from Chakotay, and I'm really glad that this is setting up season 2 and giving us more of those elements being carried through from Voyager, especially given the relationship between Chakotay and Janeway. We learn that he is 52 years in the future, and I'm sure that the mission that Janeway is taking the kids on next season will center around this mystery. The computer shows us the wormhole that the message was sent through, and this graphic is very familiar. It's one we've seen representing wormhole and wormhole-like phenomena in Star Trek before. Interestingly enough, they refer to it as an interspatial flexure. A spatial flexure is a type of spatial rift first mentioned in the Season 7 Voyager episode Q2. We see several familiar species in this episode, of course. Bolians, Orions, and Trills are seen throughout the episode in various locations. Our intrepid crew are rescued from San Francisco Bay by Starfleet, and this was very reminiscent of the end of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home to me. I have to assume that that was intentional because the parallels are very obvious here. Also, during this rescue, look very closely at the shuttle that is rescuing the kids. The registry on the shuttle is NCC 74656A. NCC 74656 was the registry number of the USS Voyager from Star Trek Voyager, and the -A suffix is usually added to the second vessel to bear the name, so it looks like there is a Voyager A floating around out there. I'm wondering, is this the possible setting for Season 2 and the ship that Janeway will be leading? During the hearing for the Protostar crew, we see that the people in charge of the hearing, the fleet admirals, are a Vulcan, an Andorian, and a Tellarite. Now, along with Janeway, it's interesting that the four of them all represent the founding members of the Federation. I really liked the reference to the Academy not being a space camp for children. If you grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, you probably saw a lot of advertisements for space camp, which always looked like a lot of fun. You could go away to train to be an astronaut, and it was always something that kids of my generation really wanted to go and do. So it was just kind of nice for that term to be thrown out here to kind of remind me of that little aspect of my youth. Janeway refers to the Federation having 150 member species. This number for Federation membership was first mentioned in Star Trek First Contact. Interestingly, given that Dal is a genetically engineered mix of many different species, it is mentioned here that he is representative of 26 of them. I very much enjoy the decision of the writers to have the kids be warrant officers in training rather than joining Starfleet Academy. I learned from writer David Mack that there was a number of reasons for this decision to be made. He was working as an advisor to the show when this episode was written, and when asked about the Starfleet Academy angle, he correctly made the point that it is very difficult to get into Starfleet Academy. Wesley Crusher had to try a number of times in order to actually be admitted. Nog had to get a letter of recommendation from a command level officer, etc., etc. Starfleet Academy is very difficult to get into, and I also like that this warrant officers in training thing will allow us to examine a side of the Star Trek universe we don't see a lot of. Non-commissioned officers aren't very prevalent in the Star Trek universe. Chief O'Brien is kind of the main one that we see. We see various crewmen over the years, but none of them are very featured other than O'Brien. So I will definitely be interested to see where this storyline goes. I'm also very curious about Gwen's mission for next season. She's going to be heading off to find her homeworld and hopefully head off the civil war that is going to happen in the future and change history. What sort of effect that will have on the timeline, I don't know, but I'm really interested to see where that goes, as well as the return of the Diviner, who is still alive out there somewhere, just not the version of him that we've seen up to this point. This was an interesting sighting in one of the final scenes of the episode, and one that I've not seen a lot of people talking about. It appears that there is an Enterprisian at the Starfleet facility that we see Rock Talk at. The Enterprisians, of course, were seen in the episode All the World's a Stage. They were the ones that were emulating Starfleet, calling it Starflight, and doing the not quite right hand gesture and saying live logs and proper. And so very interesting that one of them appears to be here at Starfleet, perhaps some sort of outreach program to them, but he is still wearing that hand-woven Starflight uniform. So I thought that was an interesting addition, and I'm curious if that's anything more than just a little Easter egg or representative of something else happening. Also in this final scene, we see Dr. Aaron McDonald, both as the basis for the physical model of this character and the voice. According to the credits, Dr. Aaron McDonald played Dr. McDonald in this scene. So a nice little tribute to Dr. Aaron McDonald. Those of you who don't know, Dr. McDonald is the technical and scientific advisor for a lot of the modern Star Trek shows, and just a wonderful human being, and really cool to see her get this tribute and this little cameo in this episode. So at the end of the episode, we see that the Protostar has become the basis for an all-new Protostar class, so it's possible we will see more of these ships in the future. However, the kids will not be on this new Protostar class starship. According to Janeway, she has much bigger plans for all of them. Very curious what that's about. wondering if this has anything to do with the evidence we've seen of the Voyager A. But all in all, I'm just very curious to see what happens next. Now, we have just recently gotten confirmation that season 2 will begin airing in 2023. Don't have a date for that yet, but definitely excited to see where that goes. And as this episode ends with just a little bit of a sting from Alexander Courage's original Star Trek theme, we are ready to head off into the unknown with this new young crew of warrant officers in training. Well, there you have it, folks. Those were the Easter eggs and continuity connections that I was able to find in these episodes. Were there any that I missed? Please let me know in the comments below. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Star Trek Picard Season 3. I am planning on doing deep dive episodes for that season of television. My aim is to have them out on the Friday immediately following the new episode. The episode drops on Thursday. I'll have the deep dive out on Friday. Now, I know I've made some grandiose promises for this channel in the past, and sometimes I have a habit of not delivering on that so much, but I do have a new work schedule, a lot more free time. My schedule matches a lot more of things that I want to do and will be much more predictable. So hopefully that will help in getting these videos out to you. I am planning on making a concerted effort to work on these deep dives as well as other videos on this channel. So if you want to be alerted when those videos are coming out, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notifications when new videos go up. So thank you all so much for watching, and thanks especially, of course, to the Patreon supporters for sticking with me and this channel. I truly do appreciate it. To everyone else, once again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, as always, live long and prosper.